Good morning or good day, everyone. This is Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, and we're here for a great video conversation today, video chat, if you will, and it's called Better Training for Better Security. Happy to be joined by Pete Chestna, who's no stranger to the DevOps.com and Security Boulevard audience. Pete is also a principal or director of developer engagement at CA Veracode and spends much of his life traveling the world preaching the DevOps gospel or DevSecOps gospel to the masses. Pete, welcome.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here.
Thank you. And then joining us today, our newcomer on the panel is Dave Wayland. Dave is a senior information security program manager at an unnamed Fortune 500 financial corp. Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. So, guys, we're talking today a little bit about better training for better security, and this kind of grows out of a survey that DevOps.com and Veracode did jointly around are people who are coming into the workforce, those already in the workforce, are they receiving the right sort of training to enable their success? And we talk about not just security folks, but the developers as well. Is the whole IT spectrum receiving the kind of security that will facilitate better training? Pete, I know you have a ton of views on this, so why don't we kick it over to you?
Sure. So one of the telling things of the survey that you and I see all the time is most developers, 7 out of 10 in the survey, said they don't get adequate training. And if you go back to people graduating from college, more than 3/4 of them said that they're not required to take any security courses. So they're just not trained in this aspect, and this is something that becomes a carrying cost of a business moving forward.
David, you heard what Peter said. What's your experience?
My experience is exactly the same. I came from being a software developer, actually, and from running development teams. And I think it's not just security. People coming out of college, they've been taught how to program, but they haven't been taught a lot of the intricacies of programming or security. So with programming, I'd run into people that were new developers that would instantiate an object inside of a loop. Why? Because it's easy. Well, when you're dealing with production scalable applications, you instantiate an object inside a loop, you start having memory management issues. So just like that, what we're dealing with security is they've been taught how to program. They've been taught the easy way, like an inline SQL statement. I'm just going to take some variables, I'm going to build out the SQL statement, and it's going to connect and everything's going to be great because I've only done it in a test environment. And now you're dealing with SQL injection, where the languages themselves have parameterized queries, which are generally pretty easy to implement, and will address the SQL injection vulnerability. But because it's a little bit harder, they weren't taught it, and they don't understand it, and they've never gotten used to it. So we have to circle back around and try to coach them up on the best ways to be secure about development after them learning for 4 or 5 years how to just develop.
Yeah, I think that they get into this habit of just doing what the assignment is. So
Right.
they're testing, they're doing one small thing. It's never put into context. One of the things that I remarked in our comments back and forth, David, was that they don't really get any practical knowledge about how do I work on a Scrum team, how does DevOps work, how do I release software. So they come up with these tests. I've got this input script, I run that, I get the right results, I'm done. And there's never anything about the quality of the code that they write. It's just, did it function properly?
Right.
Absolutely. Hey, guys, before we go further, I was negligent in our audience. If anyone would like to ask questions of Peter, David, or myself, in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is a question section, and you could type them in there. We're going to try to get to them in real time here today, as we're not doing sort of a regular webinar. So feel free to put your questions in there, and we'll do our best to try to get answers for you. And with that out of the way, so Pete and Dave, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but let me ask. Look, none of us are 23 years old here, right? What about, well, No, Pete, don't raise your eyebrows. I know you're really not 23.
I was wondering if the beard gave it away.
Yeah, but I mean, my question is this changing? Are developers coming out today maybe a little bit better prepared than, let's say, developers of 10, 15, 20 years ago?
So I'll take that. We just had an intern this last summer for application security. And he's a comp sci individual. And for the first couple of weeks, he kept on saying, none of my professors have ever talked about any of this. And we spent a good 3 weeks ramping him up on just the basic cross-site scripting, SQL injection, things like that. So right now, at least, I don't see that changing.
So I have looked into, from my alma mater, WPI, I've actually sent some email to the chair of the comp sci department to start this discussion. There's a lot in there around research on cybersecurity, but I don't see anything practical inside of the curriculum. So that maybe this is a grad student activity. I'm trying to find a way to get this introduced as a more official part of the curriculum, that it becomes part of your requirements for major. But I will reflect what David says. We're not seeing that with new employees coming into the company. We're training them from the ground up to do this stuff.
Okay. Just quickly, Samir from our audience wants to know what kind of tools exist that would explain the security-related issues during program. Would it be better if they are also taught to run analysis using tools like a SonarQube or a Clockwork, if available?
So that's a great question. And yes, there are tools. I'm a vendor, so I'm going to steer clear of specific tools. So if you think about how you want to build security in, and this whole shift left phenomenon that occurred when we did this with Agile, with quality, it's about making sure that developers have something at their fingertips to take the test and know that they're going to pass before they check their code in. So there's lots of stuff that fit into their IDEs. In the same way that developers are supposed to, and I put that in air quotes, supposed to run their unit tests prior to check-in to know that they pass, sometimes they don't, which is why you still need the assurance testing to occur inside of your pipelines. But yes, there are lots of tools that I would call those educational and preventative scanning to get that from getting into your source code base. But it's something that requires accountability. They need to feel accountable for this. And one of the things that David and I are going to go over today is, like, how do you build that accountability model such that they feel like they're responsible for it? Because as you know, Alan, most of them think that's security's problem and not mine.
Yeah. Good, David.
I was going to touch on the SonarQube aspect. What I've found with SonarQube is a lot, and even like the code analysis tools inside of Visual Studio, there's a very limited aspect of the number of rules that can be used for security. So sometimes there's a false sense of security. You go and you enable the 30 rules inside of code analysis for security, and you go, oh great, I passed. Well, the tools out there when we're doing deep scans of the binaries are much more significant than just 30 rules. So it'll give you an idea, but it's not going to give you the deep analysis of your code.
Yeah, this goes to making them competent software engineers. If they're using SonarQube in their pipelines to do lint or to do code coverage or whatever analysis is doing, they should be running that prior to check-in. So if there are security tools that you're buying, those should be available on the desktop as well.
Yep.
Agreed. Guys, let me focus one other thing, and then Pete, I'd like to hear more. I want to get into our survey that we did and some of the findings there, more than subjective kind of, gut feels. But it's not just developers or even security people who are just coming out of school, because that only represents a fraction of what we have in our workforce, right? The majority of people are already out of school, already working. And so there's, whether you want to call it continuing education, re-education, or what have you, there's that mandate as well. And Dave, you work for a large financial institution. Is there a program of, hey, you may not have gotten this out of school, or you may be here now, but we want you to continue learning what the latest, greatest, ways of doing things are? One of the most
Regarding that, I mean, one of the things I loved about being a software developer, and I would always, when I interviewed, make sure that they understood, is it's always a continuing learning process. You don't learn JSON and then never learn the new updates to JSON, or you don't learn JavaScript and not learn Angular or Node when it comes out. What we've done is we've started, and I think Pete and I are going to talk about that in a little bit. We've started our education from a secure aspect where we provide reference architectures and things like that so that we can help level up the software developers themselves to kind of integrate into their continuing education and continual growth and try to get them to understand the reasons why security is a concern and the actual exploits. And we found that when we show the exploits to a developer, they generally, that light bulb goes off, and now they're really started to get interested in actually guarding against it.
Pete, I wonder your experience?
Yeah, so if we go back to the survey again, you know, most of the people that were surveyed felt that they were unprepared with respect to security for their current job requirements. So if there's a security aspect, they feel like they're, you know, out in the woods. And a lot of them are asking for training, but the company isn't providing it to them. So, you know, it's refreshing to get someone like David on that has that knowledge and is actually sharing with the development teams. You know, they want the instructor-led or the e-learning available to them, but sometimes they have to provide that to themselves or go off on their own time to do it.
Fair enough. Pete, I know you have some other questions around survey findings and David's unique experiences. Why don't we dive into that?
Yeah, so David, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in security? So you said you came from a development background, so what got you into security?
So I spent the first 20 years of my career in application development. So I was a production .NET and Java developer, and I helped stand up enterprise architecture at Boeing. And what happened was after I did the enterprise architecture at Boeing, I went back and I was a dev lead for a company for a few years because I wanted to get back into the weeds and understand what was actually happening in the development communities. I didn't want to be one of those people on the mountaintop screaming at the wind. And I looked around and I realized I'd pretty much climbed my mountains inside of application development. And an opportunity arose inside of First American to join the information security team, and specifically to help stand up and initiate the application security group. So I love a challenge, and I saw a new set of mountain ranges that I was going to be able to climb. And so I moved over about 3 years ago now into application security, and I've loved every minute of it.
So I think the interesting thing is, how did you get your training? So you came from development, you went to security. I presume that you weren't trained in security in the same way that Alan and I weren't. So where did you get your chops?
So my chops came from when I was doing software development, specifically at Boeing. I was helping secure environments, and I was in charge of the enterprise architectures for the secure environments as well. So I started to, looking back on it, I realized I started secure coding about 10 years ago because I had to be secure because of the environments and the data and the information that we were dealing with. So when I looked at would I be able to do application security and run a team, I went through and I looked at the OWASP and the SANS, and I realized that I'd been addressing a lot of these anyways. And so other than that, as far as the application security specific training, I've just do what I always do. I usually say, give me a book in a week and I'll be intermediate. I started reading everything I could find on everything regarding application security, especially the vulnerabilities and the exploits.
Interesting. So when you went into the application security space, did usually people are thinking, and Alan, I know this is true for you, they're thinking, what tools should I buy? Interestingly enough, you have a very strong educational aspect to your program. Why is that, and how did you develop that program?
So in my early career, I was also a technical instructor, and I'm a firm believer in developers want to know. I liken developers to water. They are going to go to the path of least resistance and the lowest level you allow them. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what I want to do is I wanted to be able to provide the education to the developers so that the path of least resistance and the lowest level was what we wanted, which was secure. So, you know, the developers have insane timelines that they're running under, and they have unrealistic requirements usually. And so I wanted to have that partnering aspect with the development teams. So when we first started our tools, as soon as I started to get raw data out and started to understand what vulnerabilities were existing inside of our environment, I force ranked them against the OWASP top 10 and SANS top 25. And then I started doing monthly trainings, and it was literally, give me all the developers, we're going to go online, I'm going to fire up WebGoat, I'm going to show you a SQL injection vulnerability, I'm going to show you a man-in-the-middle attack, now I'm going to show you how to secure that. And what I wanted was the developers to have the tools and to understand that the application security program was coming at them from a partnering aspect of, we're going to tell you what's wrong, but we're also going to be able to tell you how to fix it, as opposed to just throwing you out in the wild and saying, it's wrong, it doesn't work, go deal with it yourself. So we wanted that. That's where the education aspect came in.
Hey guys, on the education aspects, got another question from Mike in the audience. What books do you guys recommend to get started with security training? And I'm going to assume it's for developers who are looking to get security savvy. Dave, how about you?
For me, originally, when I have a new developer come in, and I try to hire developers into my application security program, what I do usually is I send them to the OWASP top 10 and the SANS top 25. And I tell them, you need to understand these vulnerabilities, and you need to understand the potential exploits. You know, books are great, and you know, you can look at like gray hat hacking and you know, that type of stuff. But for me, I want them to understand the core exploit and vulnerability first, and then start to build on top of that.
Yeah, I don't have titles off the top of my head, but I know that there's a great book that I've read on threat modeling. There's another one on how to exploit web applications. There's actually 2 versions of that. There's been an update to that one recently. That those are, if you're a web application developer, those are required reading, I would think.
Yeah, and my books are on my desk, so otherwise I would be able to rattle off about 3 or 4.
Right.
Got it. Pete?
Yeah, so who pays for the program? So one of the things that I know our audience is going to ask is, I need to build this program, but I don't have budget to do it. So how did you do that, and how did you convince people to fund it?
Well, I was in the exact same boat, and how I convinced them to fund it is we write the presentations ourselves, and we deliver them ourselves. So part of my team is and part of my interview process is, I hope you enjoy public speaking, because we're going to be speaking to hundreds of people every week about multiple topics. So we've run this for the last 2 years, where we've done monthly trainings, and it's been successful. We usually, on any given presentation, we get about 10 to 15% of the development population that's online, plus we get another about 10 to 15% that follow up on our presentations as we put them online. And I like that level of impact in, but the reality is, because we do it ourselves, we didn't have to go ask for budget, and so it was a win for everyone.
Well, I mean, it is budget. It's time, right? It's time that you spend not doing other things.
And that's part of my program.
So interestingly enough, you mentioned early on that you looked at the kind of vulnerabilities you were getting out of the tools that you were running, and then you dovetailed that and created trainings for that. And you made the comment here that that the education is successful. So how do you measure success? So how do you prove that the time that you're spending actually equates to somebody has a train going by?
Oh, that's me, guys. It's the
so how I prove it is, we actually generate metrics out of our vulnerability assessment tool every week, and we publish those to the entire company, and we actually publish all our data underneath it as well. But what I do is, one of the slides that we have, one of our KPIs, is we show trending of the vulnerabilities inside of our environment, our top 10 vulnerabilities. And what I've been able to tie to is I can show very specifically that if we give a training, within 3 to 4 weeks of the training, the vulnerability that we did the training on decreases inside of our environment.
That's awesome.
And yeah, we've been able to, and then looking back, like last year versus this year, we're seeing significant decreases across all vulnerabilities across the entire environment. So that was the tough part, was trying to figure out how to get that so that we can tell people, yes, we're being successful. And it's nice to see that tail happen when we see it.
Alan, what's your experience with this? Because I mean, this is a pretty incredible story. It's one of the things that I talk about, is that kind of metadata-driven training where you take the things that they struggle with and give them training on it. But this is the first time I've heard someone say, "Yeah, I do it and I measure it."
So that's kind of novel to me. I got to be honest with you. What I've seen is, and granted, you know what? Since I started DevOps.com, I'm not out talking to as many teams perhaps as you do, Pete. But to me, it was always still more knee-jerky. And even David, with all due respect, you're knee-jerking, right? Because hey, this is the vulnerability we're seeing. Boom, we're gonna put that in the spotlight and make that go away. And then we're gonna, when the next one raises its head, it's whack-a-mole vulnerability. And there's nothing the matter with it. It's working for you. I don't mean to be critical, but I'd like to see something maybe a little bit more comprehensive, Pete. Something where, hey, we take the SANS Top 25, and it's so funny, 18 years ago, I'm sitting here thinking about the SANS Top 20. Mm-hmm. And, and here we are still talking about that stuff. And, every week we just, whether we saw it live or not, we, maybe we make posters and put it on the developers' screens or walls or something, where we're not reactive to what we've seen, but proactive, saying here's the list of these things.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with that, but if you look back at, so if I look back at my career, I got a bunch of books behind me that prove it. And David, you said you like to learn from a book. You buy this 300 or 500 page book, you pay $60 to $100 for it, and out of that you get about 15 pages worth of gold in that was worth the price of the book, and the rest of it's like, that's interesting, but it doesn't apply to me. I think the nice thing, and again, this is one of the things that I preach that David's doing, is these are things that affect our business today that you guys are struggling with. Let me help you with those. The other stuff is good, but I don't think it's as good as being pointed with your training. You're more effectively spending the dollars essentially.
Well, and we do try to be proactive too. So what we saw in July was with the new release candidate for OWASP Top 10 for 2017, CWE 915 and 113 popped as potential must fixes. And so what we did is we generated a training, and we delivered that training within a month, saying these are the new things that you're going to have to worry about. These are what we're seeing. These are the reference architectures and how you can address it. Don't get caught by surprise.
So what about open source? So do you give them, so you've got, and you said OWASP Top 10, so I'm assuming it's in there. How do you guys deal with open source? I mean, it's very topical now with Equifax now having lost not only their CISO and their CIO, but now their CEO. So, how do you talk to them about that problem?
So one of the things that I've done is I always try to use humor if I can. So if I can find an XKCD comic or something like that in the training, I will. But when I talk about open source, because what we'll get a lot of times is the developers will come back and they'll go, well, that's a third-party DLL. We can't do anything about it. And the example I use is I tell them, a hacker is not going to sit there as they're hacking your system, find a vulnerability and go, oh, wait, no, that's a third-party DLL. They have no control over that. I'm not going to do that exploit. So what we tell them is every binary that is used and deployed in your application gets scanned, and you take ownership of any vulnerabilities that are in any of the binaries that you include in your scans. And then we'll get, well, I can't control and tell the application, this third party to fix it, and we give them a couple options. We're like, get a new DLL, write it yourself, or the more popular one is treat it as it is, which is a black box. So if you're getting identified, once again, SQL injection, if you're getting identified a SQL injection vulnerability inside of the DLL, address the vulnerability before you make the call. Strongly type your parameters. Do whitelisting before you make the call, and then validate all the data coming out of the DLL to ensure that it's whitelisted against what you expect. And yeah, that adds some more coding to what you're doing, but you're still getting the benefits of the third-party DLL. You're just making sure that you're operating it in a secure way.
So, Alan, this whole, I was getting a question from the press this week about open source, and they said, is this the wake-up call? And I said, well, it's the next wake-up call, and they keep hitting the snooze button on this stuff. How do we actually get to a point where people understand that using third-party components and open source is a responsibility, and ownership falls on the development team to take account for those and the security team to track them, etc.? How do we get that message out there?
So there's no lack of people evangelizing that, Pete, and there are several companies, as we all know, who that's their business, right? Trying to secure open source components. I think, though, it has to start with a bigger realization, right? And I think most developers know this, and probably security people, but the people in the executive suites don't. And that is that, you know, something like 80% of the code in every app that we see out here, or most apps that we see out, is really third-party components, you know, stacked up, and maybe 20% customization sits on top of it. And we're probably really decent on that 20% because of things like David's talking about in these kinds of programs. But and especially with open source, and I'm a big open source proponent, right? But for too long, we've heard the open source mantra of, hey, more eyes means more security. There's more eyes on the code. If there was something wrong, it would have turned up. Well, you know, you look at like the OpenVPN one a couple of years back now, right? The fact of the matter is very few people are really, truly looking at the code behind these open source tools and components. Right. And so they don't, it's not, you know, more eyes, so more secure. There's no more eyes. I mean, there's potentially more eyes, but in actuality, it's not. So once we understand that we have the same responsibility to test and make sure that our open source component, and I don't mean, make sure our third-party components, right, not just open source, are the latest versions, defect, bug, vulnerability free. The same way we would test our own code that we wrote in-house, you're going to have this problem. Now, the good news is there are, as I mentioned, there are some tool vendors out there who really, their whole business is around, you know, just checking what components you use and are you using the latest versions. But they're not really looking to see if they're secure. They're just looking to see if you're using the latest versions. You get a new, you know, 0-day or a new kind of thing, it's still, that's not going to help you either. So, you know, I think the biggest thing is you've got to treat third-party code like your own in terms of validation and security. But it's a problem.
I guess the question is, what is it going to take? I mean, this last breach affected almost half of America. You know, if you're in this business and writing software, you know, I always talk to people and say, well, you're protecting your mother and you're protecting your grandmother and your sister and your brother and your father. It's like, when is it going to be enough? When is it going to be big enough for people to say, let's fix this?
So I'm writing an article right now for Security Boulevard. It's called Another Security Insensitivity, Another Security Breach, blah, blah, blah. One way of looking at it, guys, is over the last 10 years, someone quoted this to me, over the last 10 years, we've had 9 billion records breached. Consider that's in a world of 7 billion people, of which probably half have little to no electronic footprint whatsoever.
Right.
Right? So, you know, that's more than 2 a person almost when you really get down to it, right? All of us have had our stuff breached at least twice. And so what's it going to take, Pete? What if it hasn't already taken? What more? What do you think? Was Equifax or the next one? I don't think there's anything in what it takes. I just had this conversation over breakfast, and again, it's something I'd like to see more in education. And Dave, I'd love to hear how you deal with it, which is, hey, stuff's going to happen. We're going to have breaches despite our best efforts.
Yep.
What's our plan? What's our response? What do we do when this happens? What happens when we're the next, you're a Fortune 500 financial, it could just as easily happen to you. What happens when we're the next one? Right? How do we handle it? How do we respond? How do we mitigate? How do we manage? I think, and I've seen this over 25 years in security, we have started focusing on that instead of thinking that somehow we're going to be impenetrable. We're not going to be impenetrable. Dave, what plans do you have? How do you educate? That's another way, it's another piece of the education piece, Pete. How do we educate response?
So one of the things that I do in every training I give, and really every presentation, is I try to distill out the Verizon DBIR and really get it in front of them and tell them my very first topic is always any data breach is going to be significant to us financially and reputationally. And when I'm speaking, I tell people, it's like, this means that our company, if we have a large enough data breach, will cease to be an ongoing concern. To your point about Pete and Alan, what you were talking about, when is it big enough that they start paying attention? I will tell you that this week was the first week I ever heard from the business, what is the risk to our company if we do this? And they were doing it specifically because of Equifax. So that, at least for us, we're starting to see almost immediate concern by people that in the past may not have had an idea about security that are now putting that to the forefront. I talk a lot about the number of breaches, the fact that it's leveling off as far as number, but the size is significantly increasing for the breaches. I found a great article that Veracode had put out a few years ago that had a Symantec quote that said, 108 a data breach is going to cost per record between $188 and $277. So when I start putting those financial terms, those business terms out, that's when they start to understand, because I look at them and go, who here has a 1 million record database? And almost everyone does. I'm like, great, are you willing to lose $250 million to the company? And all of a sudden it starts to impact. But at the same time, I tell them, to me, the vulnerability management, all the stuff that we do security, it's like putting a club on your car. A club is great if someone wants to steal a car. Then it'll stop them from stealing your car probably. But if they want to steal your car, then the club isn't really going to do anything. So all we can do is we can reduce our risk as much as possible. We can get to that comfort level of we've reduced our risk by addressing all high and above, all OWASP, SAN, certain PCI vulnerabilities, that we do our scanning on a regular basis and things like that. But to your point, if someone really wants to breach us, especially a state actor, all we can do is we can try to mitigate the damage.
And how do we educate and come up with these? And Pete, I'll throw it back right out at you, right? You guys are dealing with this with multiple clients. How do you educate your team, and how do you put in place a response type of plan?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'll start with preventative stuff, because a lot of things that have been said by some of the vendors in the open source space is that they believe it was a conscious decision by Equifax to not patch the Struts vulnerability, and that they got breached because they were lazy. Whereas my contention is, I don't think they even knew about it. I don't think that they had the program in place to build that bill of materials such that they had an incident response when the CVE came out to say, what do we do now? So what we do at Veracode is, when a new CVE is announced, we look at this on two levels, because obviously we have customers that could be impacted as well, but we look at ourselves and say, what's our bill of materials? Are we impacted? If we are, what's our response plan? How fast can we spin it up? And how fast can we get things fixed and remediated? And then we look at, from a severity level and exploitability, how fast do we need to tell our customers about this? And we roll those out as quickly as possible. So it's all built into that first light of that CVE. And one of the interesting things I think that's new this year is the exploits for these are coming right on the heels of the announcement. It wasn't like, hey, here's a CVE, and then eventually there's an exploit. It's like they're almost identically timed, such that you are under active attack as soon as that's announced. So you have to be ready to go spin this incident response team up to go patch yourself, or else you're going to be breached.
Or you're just not going to, you may be breached either way.
True.
But with a good incident response plan and team ready to rock and roll, you could minimize your exposure, minimize your damage, tremendously. One of the things, David, you mentioned the Verizon data breach report. So for me, one of the key metrics that I always looked at year to year to year on that Verizon report was what was the mean or average time when a breach was discovered. Right? Because like with Equifax here, right? I mean, it's one thing if, geez, I've got it. I see a hot, we see what in my SIM, something alerted me. I see I've got an intruder here in real time. I'm dealing with it. If I got breached 6 months ago and then these people have been, siphoning off data for 6 months, I'm hosed, dude. Right? What do you do in that? That's a very different response than an active intruder response.
Right.
Not to
So
get all,
I'll argue we're getting a little bit off topic here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. All right, Pete.
Okay.
Look, you asked me. I told you, man.
That's true. It's true.
I'm sorry.
It's worth exploring.
Yeah.
David, can you tell me a little bit about how you onboard new employees? So one of the things that I've seen, a customer that I also wanted to include in this webinar, actually takes 2.5 weeks, and they train their developers before hands touch keyboard on what's expected from the business for them from a security aspect, which I think is an incredible investment to make. You're showing the developers that it's very important, and you're giving them the training and tools that they need at that point. So what do you do in that aspect?
So I love that idea, and I want to get there. I look at things a lot from a software developer perspective. So for me, we're trying to be agile. We're doing continuous improvement. So we started off we have an information security training, and we send out the SANS newsletter every month to keep it in people's minds. We do our monthly trainings, and what we're starting up now is, so we don't do anything on a new developer level. Other than we have the trainings available and we speak to the development teams. But what we're going to be doing starting in the new year is all developers, regardless of new or existing, are going to have to take training tailored to the OWASP Top 10 and the SANS Top 25. It'll be an hour, and they're going to have to take it annually, and it'll be annually on day of hire. So that's going to be rolling out as now that we have the maturity inside of our application security program. But also, the hugest thing is this is a cultural change, and it's the way putting QA into development was 15 years ago. So the developers have been hearing us for 2 years now. We're on our change management board. We have control over whether RFCs can go to production or not. And now it's going to be, now we have this dedicated training to you. And what I would like to do is actually, I'm going to start off annually, and my goal is to get it to quarterly and have it more specific to custom vulnerabilities that we see inside our environment, as well as the annual, which is the overall vulnerabilities. We also do deep dives of our tools and of specific vulnerabilities. But that's ad hoc.
So there's a lot of frustration with security professionals. Now, you happen to be in a good place where your company supports the security program. It's mandated. You can actually prevent things from going to production, which is something that most companies cannot do. They have to find a way to weave into the process and get people on board. So what would be your advice to those that are trying to scrap together an application security program, desperately want to do the right thing, but aren't being supported by the development side of the house?
So my best advice is, it's something that like I said, I try to hire developers, is I say that our application security team speaks developer. If you go start setting up those conversations with the dev leads and with the developers themselves, get them to understand, show them an actual attack, get them engaged. If you can get the development community to start paying attention, they're going to start pushing. It's tough if you don't have senior management support, and I am in a very lucky position that we have board of directors support. We also get audited about 500 times a year, so most of the applications understand that. And the way I pitch it to them is, when we get audited, if you're following our processes, you don't have to be on the audit call. My team will be on the audit call because we have all the information and we can speak to the process. So once again, we try to make the path of least resistance the path that we want them to take. Yes, Alan?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Dave, finish up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, but the ultimate key, in my opinion, is you have to get the developers to understand. And the very first training I delivered was SQL injection. And was it the #1 vulnerability in our environment? No. But everyone hears SQL injection. But very few people have ever seen an active SQL injection happen. So I fired up WebGoat, and I did a man-in-the-middle attack and showed them exactly what a SQL injection looks like and what you can get back and the actual impact. And that got the buy-in from the developers, because we were able to talk about it from a practical exploit point of view, but I was also able to crack open the code and go, look, all you have to do is this. Java and Microsoft have parameterized queries.
Right.
All you have to do is this. And they looked at it and they went, oh, that's it? So they got that visceral reaction of, look, this is an exploit on a database. This is what it looks like. And this is how easy it is to ensure that that never happens. So it's the buy-in from the developers, and doing that kind of discussion with the development teams is going to help them start to understand. And then everything's a conversation, everything is communication. So you have to start getting the business to understand and try to get grassroots from there.
Hey guys, if I could jump in, we've had some other people join the broadcast. Guys, if you have questions, there is a question section of your GoToWebinar control panel, and if you type your questions in there, Pete, David, or I will do our best to try to answer them in real time. So fire away on your questions. Sorry about that. Pete, go ahead. I know you had more on your list.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm curious about, and this comes out of conversations that I have with people that are more advanced from a active threat matrix than I am. How much do you look at how you're being attacked and bring that to your development team as kind of threat intelligence of, it's not just theoretical, here's what we're seeing and here's what I need you guys to do about it?
Well, that is definitely part of what we put into the force ranking, and we've actually, while we budget out and try to figure out what we're going to talk about throughout the year, as exigent circumstances happen, we do have ad hoc training that we'll put out. We'll reach out to the senior managers and let them know, hey, there's something that we're seeing, that we're being an attack vector that we haven't seen before, that we need to guard against. So once again, we put together a quick training. We get them to understand. It's like, we won't just use the name or the CVE. It'll be in layman's terms what the exploit is, what the vector is, and then we let them know not only what we're doing to help secure them, but also what they can do and the things they can start doing immediately. We're primarily agile, So if we have something new like that, we can pretty quickly start to get that into the development stream as a user story.
So from an educational standpoint, do you do things like tabletop exercises to kind of inform people of, here's what could happen? Look, we have a smoking hole in our production environment, now what? Or
Right.
someone's exfiltrated a bunch of data, was it protected? Those kind of things.
That is part of our maturity journey, and that's on our roadmap to do in 2018, is to start doing those types of threat modeling exercises on a per application basis and tabletop exercises with business units. We feel that after 2 years of getting the word out and having people understand and getting used to a monthly cadence of training, and a lot of that's helpful is the cadence. They know that every month we're doing a training. Therefore, they're used to that. Now, if we take one of those trainings and we go, we're going to do a threat modeling exercise, then we find actually we get about 3 times as many individuals on the call because it's something new. But they're used to having it, so when we institute the new thing, we get a little bit of buzz on the fact that it's a new thing. But yeah, that's what we plan on doing, is getting to that level. And after speaking with the teams directly for a couple of years now, they're at a level of competency with secure development that, doing a threat modeling exercise is going to make sense. If we'd done it the first couple of months, where they still are unsure about what are the exploits and why, then it would just be a little bit too advanced.
Hey, Dave, I have a follow-on question to that. So one of the things I've heard from people, and it goes, Pete, directly to our kind of survey, perception, which is, you know what, I'd almost rather people don't have some prior training, because I don't know how good it is, I don't know how well-rounded it is, I don't know if it's if they're teaching them the kind of stuff we want them and how we want them to teach. I'd almost start with like a nice lump of clay. I'd rather start with a nice soft lump of clay and mold it myself rather than inherit someone else's imperfect masterpiece, right? And I wonder.
That kind of goes back to the discussion that we were having before we went live today about coaching and about having different kinds of teams in different sports, where I as a longtime soccer coach, I feel the same way. You get someone that comes in and doesn't understand the system, doesn't understand what you're trying to do. This is the same kind of thing, but in software.
Well, I saw both from coaching wrestling, where maybe someone was taught something, but they weren't taught the proper technique. But I'll even do it when I was a software developer. I would rather write something from scratch than try to take someone else's code and make it work. It always takes longer to try to recode something than to just code it from scratch. At the same time, I would be very happy if people just had a core understanding that, security vulnerabilities are bad and we need to treat them like bugs. And, I'll adjust them on, well, for cross-site scripting, we address it this way, or for, CRLF, we address it this way. And we have our standards, and we can put them to that. But I would just be happy if they acknowledge the fact that they need to treat vulnerabilities like bugs.
It's a good start, a fine beginning, as they say in Vegas.
Yeah.
But Pete, goes to the heart of why we did this survey then. So should developers get a lot of security training prior to coming to their position, or should they look to their employer to say, hey, I'm your lump of clay, mold me, right? Or,
Right.
I don't want to bring any bad habits to the table.
Well, so unfortunately, if you look at how teams are actually being tasked, if you look at what DevOps asks you to do, it's 20% downtime to do the kinds of things that we're talking about, going out and training yourself and getting better, or rewriting a piece of code that's been bothering you for a while. We don't give them that kind of time. So now it's all time on their own and after hours. So how much can you expect of them? And if you look at all the things that they need to get good at, look at the new frameworks, look at the new methodologies, look at the new architectures, there's so much training that they need to have. The company has to take accountability for that and say, it's our job to make you as good as you need to be, and we're going to provide that for you. So I would, in my interviewing with a company, I would look for that and say, how good are you guys at actually providing me the skills that I need to do my job?
Now, One of the things I would like to see in the training and all software development training, because I've taken a bunch of software development training that wasn't college, and they don't speak about security either, is if they just start to integrate everything into the fact that when you're writing code, if you're writing SQL statements, make sure that you aren't susceptible to injection. If they drop these tidbits in throughout the training, now the developers start to think that, hey, they've been exposed at least to the fact that there's security concerns, much like memory management concerns or optimization of code or multi-threading aspects. A lot of developers have it multi-threaded, but they've been exposed to the fact that when you multi-thread, you have to use certain objects and they have to be, accessed in a specific way. If they just start dropping in those security things as well, then it's no longer a one-off. It's no longer, well, I'm going to write code. Now I have to write secure code. I'm going to write code and I need to make it secure.
Right.
So
with that, I guess my last question would be, how do you help developers fix what they find? So you give training on specific topics.
Yes.
Something new comes up, the tool shows them some new CWE that they're not familiar with. How do you provide that kind of support for them?
So what we do is we have all of our training published. So anytime a new team comes onto our tool, we send them out the links to all of our previously published information. So we let them know we have all of this out there. We have reference architecture, so we work with our development teams so that when they sit there and when they get something that's really good that addresses a known vulnerability, we ask them their permission, we take that code, we package it up, and we put it out on our internet or intranet, and we tell them, so when we have someone else come in and they're like, hey, we're a brand new program and we just saw, 100 CRLF vulnerabilities, what do? We go, we have not only training, but we have a reference architecture, and this is copy and paste code. We want to get to the point that we're going to be a NuGet, but right now it's copy and paste code. You drop it in, it is guaranteed to work. And we give that to them. So we actually have reference architectures for 9 of our top 10 vulnerabilities inside our environment. We have about 15 reference architectures overall that they can use, they can access, and we've seen teams be able to eliminate approximately 90% of their vulnerabilities within a week just by using the reference architectures that we have provided. And we usually tell them, give us a single development resource, a couple of days, and at least one meeting with my team, and we'll be able to hit between 70 and 90% of your vulnerabilities.
Beautiful.
Hey, Alan, what's your guess on how, Dave, don't answer this question yet. What's your guess on how big his security team is? Because I'm sure a lot of people that are on the call right now are saying, yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's got a damn army over there.
Dave, but you're just AppSec, or are you all out, everything sec?
No, I'm just AppSec.
Your AppSec team is going to be really small, unfortunately. I'm going to guess Fortune 500 financial institution. If you have a dozen, you got a ton of people. I don't know, 10 to 12.
Yeah, so I guess I would guess that, but the way it sounds from the force multiplication he's been able to do, it sounds like 20, but I would guess like 8 to 10.
Because we're prejudiced. What's the number, Dave? Oh, you're not allowed to say.
Including me, 4.
4.
Wow. You guys got a lot done.
And up until last year, it was me. So the first year, it was me.
Yeah. Let me, guys, we got about 6-7 minutes left. Let me turn this around because you said, yeah, that was your last question. I'm going to jump in now. We've spoken for the last 45 minutes about educating our developers to be more security aware. But we haven't talked about educating our security people to be more developer aware.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know the old saying, until you walk the mile in those shoes, you don't know what it feels like. And you know what? Both of you guys come from a developer background, so you got it. But there are a lot of people coming onto security teams now who don't have a developer background. They think of developers as nincompoops who know how to code but don't give a rat's ass about, excuse my language, who don't really care about security, and it's their job to keep the world safe. And I think, maybe it's empathy training more than anything else, but there has to be some training for the security person to learn how to deal with the developers, right? Because I know you got more than 4 developers, right? I mean, you've got,
We have
tons of
thousands.
them. Okay, so you've got to be able to empathize. You've got to understand their world. You've got to understand their challenges. You've got to understand, strengths, weaknesses. How can we make our security people better trained?
Well, for me, the tough part is this. I always make sure that I say that I was a production developer. My code actually went through the process and went to production. I try to hire production developers, or people with a development background, because of that empathy. I think that any exposure to software development is going to be good because it's going to allow you to talk with developers. But like you said, until you've been on a project where someone comes in and goes, hey, we were going to release in a month, but the manager just promised that we're releasing in 2 weeks, and also our scope just increased by 50%. So kiss your families goodbye and your weekends goodbye because we got to get this out the door. Until you've lived that, you can't. It's tough to have the empathy for it. So that's once again why I try to get ex-developers into my team, so we have that level of empathy.
Pete?
So this is one of the things that I'm constantly, as you and I were talking about upcoming conferences, I speak at a lot of B-Sides conferences, I go to a lot of InfoSec conferences. This is exactly the message I'm trying to get across, is they need to have that empathy. They need to read things like the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook and understand how software is built. Or as they, A Few Good Men, pick up a gun and stand a post, write some software. Write cleansing functions, see if they pass security muster, introduce some security libraries to your developers and become a software developer yourself. That's one way to build the empathy, is to have to live the pain. So, that whole aspect of live that life for a little while, or at least try to understand it, attend meetings, go to a retrospective, go to a grooming session, understand how the sausage is made, and you're going to enjoy the sausage more, and you're going to have more empathy for why it was hard.
And yeah. Absolutely, guys. And again, I don't know if that's something we can teach in colleges or universities or even high schools. The high school here where my kids went to school, they actually have started a cybersecurity academy.
Wow.
And
nice.
Yeah, I got involved early on, but a lot of reasons I didn't. I said didn't want to be involved anymore. But that being said, I don't know if they really even touched on that aspect of it. They were so busy just teaching kind of basics.
Well, and I don't know that even developers coming out of college are ready. I mean, they don't know. There's no way until it's gone from, an example I would give is when I was writing code in college, I was already doing it in a production world. So there were times where I would make the decision, I'm going to take a B. I'm not going to write this function that's going to take me 5 hours because I don't feel like getting the A. So I'll write it and I'll get the B. And when I do career development and talking with people, I'm like, the hardest part about being a production developer is A, quality work every day. And
by the way, that's not developer. That's everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's life, man. As a father of 2 boys, I'm constantly fighting that battle. Don't take the B.
Yep.
Go the extra mile, grab that A, because it matters. It matters. You take pride in what you do. I think, Dave, your example of, hey, we got to finish this in half the time and do twice the scope. And man, the first thing that goes right down the toilet is quality. Because I'm just looking to finish.
Right.
I'm not looking to excel.
Because I want to go to that cookout this weekend.
Exactly.
Right. I want to, and it's human nature. They're people too with lives.
Right.
So, pride in your work, whether it be security development, secure development, ops, or even just being evangelist on webinars here, is an important. You got to take pride in everything you do. That being said, guys, we're at the top of the hour, and we're going to have to wrap this one up. Dave Wayland, thank you so much for taking the time and spending some of your valuable time and sharing your experiences with us. Pete Chestna, as always, it's a pleasure having you on. Hope to see you again soon. And that's going to call a wrap on today. I hope everyone listening got something out of it. I thought it was a great conversation. And we hope to see you again soon on another webinar or video cast like this for DevOps.com and Security Boulevard. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll see you all again soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.